Okay, moving swiftly on to the obstructive sleep apnea drug, IHL42X. I'm only able to deliver a limited amount of information about this as the patent is still under submission. But basically, obstructive sleep apnea is a very common problem. It's the second most diagnosed respiratory problem after asthma. Now think about the amount of medication that there is to treat asthma. There may be 500 different types of inhalers. There is not one drug today that treats sleep apnea. They say between 9 and 28% of women have apneic events which are treatable, just having them and no one's doing anything about it. 24 to 26% of men have treatable apneic events every night. And for those who don't know, apnea means stopping breathing. And so this makes it the largest cause of chronic pathology for which no pharmacological treatment exists Australia-wide, in fact globally. The economic impact in Australia, so Deloitte Access Economics were hired by the government to do a study about whether they should do funding, public funding for Cpap machines, and the answer was basically a yes to an extreme. It was so obvious. And the reason is that obstructive sleep apnea, the cost to the Australian population was $21.2 billion per annum. And this was thought to be through increased heart disease, which is coronary artery disease, increased levels of stroke, congestive heart failure, depression, motor vehicle accidents because people are sleepy at the wheel, workplace accidents because they're sleepy at work, and type 2 diabetes. So massive, significant health and work impact. Now, the only existing treatment that's approved and validated for sleep apnea is the Cpap mask. And anyone who's ever tried it, it's a fairly bulky, cumbersome, and hard to use device. It's very noisy. Most patients who have it and use it find it disrupts their life in some way. And a recent paper showed that 50% of people who've been prescribed and have bought a Cpap mask have abandoned it at 12 months. So in terms of compliance, it's terrible. If there was a medication that people told you, this will save your life, this will cure you, this will treat whatever you've got, but you must take it, and 50% of people have abandoned it at 12 months, in my eyes, that medication is a failure. So I think there's a lot of scope for improvement in capturing a market that is currently unmet demand here. And there was a survey that showed what were the most common reasons for people abandoning Cpap, and it was noise and discomfort. They're very noisy machines because they're blowing air into a pipe which the mask seated on your face. Some people found it very difficult to use it and just didn't like the Cpap machine, and they found it very bulky and not portable to travel with. Some people got claustrophobic with it. It's not cheap. It's several $1,000s to buy these high quality Cpap machines, and often their partners or spouses complained that it was too bulky and noisy and disrupted life. So I think if we have a drug that shows tremendous efficacy, we've got a good chance of being able to displace the Cpap machine, because most people would prefer to take a tablet form medication than to use a Cpap every night. Now, the current evidence on cannabinoids in obstructive sleep apnea is very, very strong. So Carly has been the main researcher globally. He's an American physician. He published a study in Sleep Journal, which is probably the #1 sleep medicine journal globally, and it showed that dronabinol reduced the severity of obstructive sleep apnea by 30%. So this is across the board, males, females, thin men, fat men, everyone. It showed that this is a very, very significant drug. So as doctors, we consider clinically significant to be 10 to 15%. So 30% is like a wow moment. That's an eye-popping moment. And this has been further replicated by 3 other studies and from different populations. One was in Japan, so very different gene pool, very different population habitus, and still the same outcome was obtained there. So we think this is a genuine effect of dronabinol. Now, one of the issues of dronabinol is that dronabinol, for those who don't know, is synthetic THC. So one of the issues is you'll still develop the same level of mild impairment that you would with THC anyway. And so for those people who have to sleep and then go to work the next day or drive the next day, that's an issue. So the challenge here was to create a drug that gives enough dronabinol to fix their breathing issues, but doesn't give so much that it prevents them from being able to drive or operate and function normally the next day. So our drug, IHL42X, has been designed in such a way that it achieves both those 2 goals without compromising the patient. So how do cannabinoids work? Basically, people who suffer with sleep apnea, it's generally divided into central sleep apnea or peripheral. And at a very, very simplified level, peripheral sleep apnea is where people typically have a lot of body fat around the neck, and as they lie down in the supine position, as they drop their level of consciousness and fall asleep, the fat around the neck compresses the trachea and the airway tubes, and it makes breathing in and breathing out difficult at night. Central sleep apnea is something wrong with their brain's ability to sense the carbon dioxide. So under normal circumstances, the trigger for me and you breathing is our carbon dioxide level rises. The increased CO2 is a stimulus to breathe. We breathe in, we blow off the CO2 by breathing out. Our blood CO2 drops, and then we stop breathing. As it builds up with normal metabolism, the CO2 hits another trigger. We inhale again and breathe out again and blow off the CO2, and it's maintained within a very tight frame. So people who've got central sleep apnea, their brain has been designed so it's slightly oversensitive. So they overbreathe, and then they underbreathe, and they overbreathe, and they underbreathe. So by overbreathing, they blow off too much CO2. It puts their body into an apneic phase where they're now not breathing. So they typically pause or have these little spells where they're having these apneas. And anybody who's got a partner or a spouse who suffers with sleep apnea will physically be able to tell. They stop breathing for 30 seconds, 40 seconds, long periods of time. Sometimes they even go blue around the lips. And then they suddenly take a big sustained breath where they're trying to capture it when their body recognizes, okay, we've gone too far, and then they overbreathe again. And so they sort of oscillate between this overbreathing and underbreathing and creating apneas and pauses in their breathing. So dronabinol and the cannabinoids work by just resetting the brain so it stops having that overbreathing, underbreathing response. And that's what we call loop gain. And it brings it in so it's the same as normal people physiologically. But having said that, the challenge was always being able to use dronabinol and also create a safe environment. So this is a study that we know the efficacy has been proven in other studies. This is really about creating safety and tolerability of a drug that achieves the goal of treating the underlying disease without compromising the patient's safety and tolerability of the drug itself. We've addressed this, and unfortunately I'm not able to disclose in full detail at the moment what the drug structure is, but it's been designed in such a way that it achieves those two overarching goals safely, and we'll be testing that over the next few months and years at the Swinburne Medicinal Cannabis Research Collaboration. So summary, massive unmet need, greater than 1 billion plus market. The good points are dronabinol's already been shown to be very effective in treating OSA in multiple studies and across a very heterogeneous population. Japanese people, Australians, Americans, very different group of people. The improvements to enhance the clinical performance is underway. That's what we're doing to improve the clinical output of this drug. And it's been engineered to achieve the same efficacy with lower adverse effects. And having said that, as soon as we've completed the formulation of a product that we feel very comfortable with, and we've lodged a patent fully over that, then we'll be able to start achieving immediate term sales revenue under the special access scheme.